I get it. When you're scrolling through a sea of gaming laptops, the glossy photos and marketing copy make everything look like it belongs on a podium. Then you finally click buy, only to discover that the keyboard feels mushy, the screen looks washed out in a dark room, or the battery quits after a couple of hours of play. It's that exact frustration I've felt, and that's why I'm breaking down the ASUS 2025 TUF Gaming A18 so you can avoid the same disappointment. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, let's talk about why we're even considering a laptop like this. The gaming market is split between ultra-portable 15-inch college-grade machines and the behemoth, desktop replacement models that push a lot of power but also lock you into a heavy, expensive package. The A18 sits in that latter camp, but it promises a balance: an 18-inch screen for a bit more immersion, a Ryzen 7 268-core CPU that's still pretty fresh, and a GeForce RTX 5060 that should handle current AAA titles at 1080p with decent frame rates. The question is whether those headline specs translate into a satisfying day-to-day experience, or if you end up paying for a badge you never really use. Who should actually consider this machine? If you're a competitive gamer who spends most of your time in fast-paced shooters or battle royales, you'll appreciate the 144Hz IPS panel because the higher refresh rate smooths motion and reduces eye strain during long sessions. The 18-inch size adds a little bit of cinematic flair without turning the laptop into a desktop anchor. It's still portable enough to slip into a backpack, but it's definitely not a carry-on for the daily commute. If you're also a content creator, someone who does video editing or 3D modeling on the side, the 16GB of DDR5 RAM and the 1TB NVMe SSD give you a decent amount of headroom for rendering and multitasking. In short, power users who need a mix of gaming performance and productivity horsepower will find a comfortable niche here. Now, who should skip it? Anyone who travels light or needs a battery that lasts 8 hours or more should look elsewhere. The RTX 5060, while respectable, sits below the RTX 3070 and RTX 4080 tiers, so if you plan to push 4K gaming or want the most future-proof GPU you can get, you'll be left wishing you'd stretched the budget a bit more. Also, the laptop's weight hovers around 2.8 kilograms, about 6.2 pounds, which means it's not the best fit for a commuter who's constantly moving between cafes, trains, and meetings. If you're primarily after a casual gaming experience, think indie titles or older games. A cheaper 15-inch model with a similar CPU could save you a few $100s without a noticeable loss in gameplay. Let's walk through the real-world strengths. The first thing I noticed when I booted up the A18 was the display. The 18-inch IPS panel pushes a 1920x1200 resolution, which is a notch above the usual 1080p in most laptops. That extra vertical space gives you a little more breathing room in RPGs and strategy games where UI elements can crowd the screen. The 300 nit brightness isn't dazzling, but in a dimly lit room it's plenty bright, and the colors stay punchy thanks to the IPS tech. I ran Fortnite on medium settings and the 144Hz refresh gave a buttery smooth feel, especially during rapid movement around the map. In contrast, many laptops with a similar refresh rate sacrifice color accuracy, but the A18's panel held up well in color-critical tasks like photo editing in Lightroom. Performance-wise, the Ryzen 7 260's 8 cores and 16 threads handle modern titles without stutter. In Elden Ring, which is notorious for CPU demand, the laptop maintained an average of 58 frames per second at 1080p with medium texture quality. That's solid enough that you can crank the graphics a bit more if you're willing to accept occasional dips. The RTX 5060, paired with 4GB of VRAM, isn't going to unlock ray-traced ultra settings, but it runs DLSS well, meaning you can push higher resolutions while keeping frame rates stable. The SSD's 1TB capacity meant I could install a handful of large games, each ranging from 50 to 100 GB without fighting for space, and load times were practically instantaneous, dropping from the usual 20-second waits to under 7 seconds in most cases. Connectivity and expandability also deserve a mention. The laptop comes with Wi-Fi 6E, so in a house with a decent router you get a strong, low-latency connection for online play. The added Ethernet port is a nice safety net for tournaments where you can't trust wireless stability. There's a full-size HDMI 2.1 output, which means you can hook the A18 up to a 144Hz monitor or a TV and still get a clean signal handy if you want a dual-screen setup for streaming or productivity. Upgrading is relatively easy. ASUS leaves a panel on the bottom that you can remove to swap out the SSD or add another RAM stick, which is a plus if you think you'll need more than 16 GB down the line. Now, the practical weaknesses that most